Leviticus. Chapters 13 through 15 delve into the ancient Israelite practices concerning purity, mainly focusing on skin diseases, mold in fabrics and houses, and bodily discharges. These chapters emphasize the necessity of cleanliness and the role of priests in diagnosing and purifying individuals. This attention to physical and spiritual purity reflects a more profound spiritual truth: the importance of being set apart and holy as God's people. The intricate rituals and strict guidelines highlight the seriousness with which God views purity and the lengths He goes to maintain a holy community. Consider how these ancient purity practices in Leviticus can mirror your spiritual journey. In your life, what impurities do you need to bring before God for cleansing? How might you actively seek purity in your daily walk with God? Heavenly Father, guide me in understanding the depths of your holiness. Purify my heart and mind, that I may walk in your ways and honor you in all I do. In Jesus' name, amen. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Leviticus chapter 13. Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "When a man has a swelling, a scab, or a bright spot on the skin of his body, and it becomes an infection of leprosy on the skin of his body, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons, the priests. The priest shall examine the plague on the skin of the body. When the hair in the plague has turned white, and the plague appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a plague of leprosy. Then the priest shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. If the bright spot is white in the skin of his body and doesn't appear to be deeper than the skin, and its hair hasn't turned white, then the priest shall isolate the one who has the plague 7 days. The priest shall examine him on the 7th day. If in his eyes the plague is arrested, and the plague hasn't spread in the skin, then the priest shall isolate him 7 more days. The priest shall examine him again on the 7th day. If the plague has faded, and the plague hasn't spread in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is a scab. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads on the skin after he has shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he shall show himself to the priest again. The priest shall examine him. If the scab has spread in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When the plague of leprosy is in a man, then he shall be brought to the priest. The priest shall examine him. Behold, if there is a white swelling in the skin, and it has turned the hair white, and there is raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic leprosy in the skin of his body. The priest shall pronounce him unclean, and shall not isolate him, for he is unclean. If leprosy breaks out all over the skin, and the leprosy covers all the skin of him who has the plague from his head even to his feet, as far as it appears to the priest, then the priest shall examine him. Behold, if the leprosy has covered all his flesh, he shall pronounce him clean of the plague. It has all turned white. He is clean. But whenever raw flesh appears in him, he shall be unclean. The priest shall examine the raw flesh and pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean. It is leprosy. Or if the raw flesh turns again and is changed to white, then he shall come to the priest. The priest shall examine him. Behold, if the plague has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce him clean of the plague. He is clean. But if the bright spot stays in its place and doesn't spread, it is the scar of the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or if there is in the skin of one's flesh a burn from fire, and the quick flesh of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish white or white, then the priest shall examine it, and behold, If the hair in the bright spot has turned white, and it looks deeper than the skin, it is leprosy. It has broken out in the burn. The priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is the plague of leprosy. But if the priest examines it, and behold, there are no white hairs in the bright spot, and it isn't lower than the skin, but is faint, then the priest shall shut him up 7 days. And the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. If it is spreading in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is the plague of leprosy. If the bright spot stays in its place and doesn't spread in the skin, but is faint, it is the swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is the scar from the burn. When a man or a woman has a plague on the head or on the beard, then the priest shall examine the plague, and behold, if its appearance is deeper than the skin, and there is thin yellow hair in it, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an itch. It is leprosy of the head or of the beard. If the priest examines the plague of the itch, and behold, its appearance isn't deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall shut up the one who has the plague of the itch 7 days. And in the 7th day, the priest shall examine the plague. If the itch hasn't spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, and the appearance of the itch isn't deeper than the skin, then he shall shave himself, but he shall not shave the itch. And the priest shall shut up the one who has the itch 7 days more. And in the 7th day the priest shall examine the itch. And behold, if the itch hasn't spread in the skin, nor is its appearance deeper than the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the itch spreads much in the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall examine him. And behold, if the itch has spread in the skin, the priest needn't seek for the yellow hair. He is unclean. But if in his eyes the itch is at a standstill, and black hair has grown up in it, the itch is healed, he is clean. The priest shall pronounce him clean. When a man or a woman has bright spots in the skin of their body, even white bright spots, then the priest shall examine them. Behold, if the bright spots in the skin of their body are dull white, it is a harmless rash. It has broken out in the skin. He is clean. If a man's hair has fallen from his head, he is bald. He is clean. If his hair has fallen off from the front part of his head, he is forehead bald. He is clean. But if there is on the bald head or the bald forehead a reddish-white plague, it is leprosy breaking out on his bald head or his bald forehead. Then the priest shall examine him, and behold, if the swelling of the plague in his bald head or in his bald forehead is reddish-white, like the appearance of leprosy in the skin of the flesh, he is a leprous man. He is unclean. The priest shall surely pronounce him unclean. His plague is on his head. The leper in whom the plague is, his clothes shall be torn, and the hair of his head shall hang loose. He shall cover his upper lip, and shall cry, Unclean, unclean. All the days in which the plague is in him, he shall be unclean. He is unclean. He shall dwell alone. His dwelling shall be outside of the camp. The garment also that the plague of leprosy is in, whether it is a woolen garment or a linen garment, whether it is in warp or woof, of linen or of wool, whether in a skin or in anything made of skin. If the plague is greenish or reddish in the garment, or in the skin, or in the warp, or in the woof, or in anything of skin, it is a plague of leprosy, and shall be shown to the priest. The priest shall examine the plague, and shut up that which has the plague 7 days. He shall examine the plague on the 7th day. If the plague has spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in the skin, whatever service skin is used for, the plague is an active leprosy. It is unclean. He shall burn the garment, whether the warp or the woof, in wool or in linen, or anything of skin in which the plague is. For it is an active leprosy. It shall be burnt in the fire. If the priest examines it, and behold, the plague hasn't spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in anything of skin, then the priest shall command that they wash that in which the plague is, and he shall shut it up 7 days more. The priest shall examine the plague after it has been washed. If the plague hasn't changed its color, though the plague hasn't spread, it is unclean. You shall burn it in the fire. It is a fret inward, whether it is bare within or without. If the priest looks and behold, the plague has somewhat faded after the washing of it, then he shall tear it out of the garment, or out of the skin, or out of the warp, or out of the woof. If it appears still in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in anything of skin, it is spreading. You shall burn that in which the plague is with fire. The garment, either warp or woof, or whatever thing of skin it is, which you shall wash, if the plague has departed from them, then it shall be washed the second time, and shall be clean. This is the law of the plague of leprosy in a garment of wool or linen, either in the warp or the woof, or anything of skin, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. Leviticus chapter 14. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, This shall be the law of the leper in the day of his cleansing. He shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out of the camp. The priest shall examine him. If the plague of leprosy is healed in the leper, then the priest shall command them to take for him who is to be cleansed 2 living clean birds, cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop. The priest shall command them to kill one of the birds in an earthen vessel over running water. As for the living bird, he shall take it, and the cedar wood, and the scarlet, and the hyssop, and shall dip them and the living bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over the running water. He shall sprinkle on him who is to be cleansed from the leprosy 7 times, and shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird go into the open field. He who is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe himself in water. Then he shall be clean. After that he may come into the camp, but shall dwell outside his tent 7 days. It shall be on the 7th day that he shall shave all his hair off his head, and his beard and his eyebrows. He shall shave off all his hair. He shall wash his clothes. He shall bathe his body in water, and he shall be clean. On the 8th day he shall take 2 male lambs without blemish, and 1 ewe lamb a year old without blemish, and 3/10 parts of an ephah of fine flour for a meal offering, mixed with oil, and 1 log of oil. The priest who cleanses him shall set the man who is to be cleansed, and those things before Yahweh, at the door of the tent of meeting. The priest shall take 1 of the male lambs, and offer him for a trespass offering, with the log of oil, and wave them for a wave offering before Yahweh. He shall kill the lamb in the place where they kill the sin offering and the burnt offering, in the place of the sanctuary. For as the sin offering is the priest's, so is the trespass offering. It is most holy. The priest shall take some of the blood of the trespass offering, and the priest shall put it on the tip of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest shall take some of the log of oil, and pour it into the palm of his own left hand. The priest shall, sprinkle with his right finger some of the oil that is in his left hand 7 times before Yahweh. The priest shall put some of the oil that is in his hand on the tip of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on the place of the blood of the trespass offering. The rest of the oil that is in the priest's hand he shall put on the head of him who is to be cleansed, to make atonement for him before Yahweh. He shall offer one of the turtle doves, or of the young pigeons, such as he can afford, even such as he can afford for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering, with the meal offering. The priest shall make atonement for him who is to be cleansed before Yahweh. This is the law for him in whom is the plague of leprosy, who cannot afford the usual cleansing. Yahweh spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, When you have come into the land of Canaan, which I give to you for a possession, and I put a spreading mildew in a house in the land of your possession, then he who owns the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, It seems to me there is some sort of plague in the house. The priest shall command that they empty the house before the priest goes in to examine the plague, that all that is in the house not be made unclean. Afterward, the priest shall go in to inspect the house. He shall examine the plague, and behold, if the plague is in the walls of the house with hollow streaks, greenish or reddish, and it appears to be deeper than the surface, then the priest shall go out of the house to the door of the house and shut up the house 7 days. The priest shall come again on the 7th day, and look. If the plague has spread in the walls of the house, then the priest shall command that they take out the stones in which is the plague, and cast them into an unclean place outside of the city. He shall cause the inside of the house to be scraped all around, and they shall pour out the mortar that they scrape off outside of the city into an unclean place. They shall take other stones and put them in the place of those stones. He shall take other mortar and shall plaster the house. If the plague comes again and breaks out in the house after he has taken out the stones, and after he has scraped the house, and after it is plastered, then the priest shall come and look. If the plague has spread in the house, it is a destructive mildew in the house. It is unclean. He shall break down the house, its stones, its timber, and all the house's mortar. He shall carry them out of the city into an unclean place. Moreover, he who goes into the house all the while that it is shut up shall be unclean until the evening. He who lies down in the house shall wash his clothes, and he who eats in the house shall wash his clothes. If the priest shall come in and examine it, and behold, the plague hasn't spread in the house after the house was plastered, then the priest shall pronounce the house clean, because the plague is healed. To cleanse the house, he shall take 2 birds, and cedar wood, and scarlet, and hyssop. He shall kill one of the birds in an earthen vessel over running water. He shall take the cedar wood, and the hyssop, and the scarlet, and the living bird, and dip them in the blood of the slain bird, and in the running water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. He shall cleanse the house with the blood of the bird, with the running water, with the living bird, with the cedar wood, with the hyssop, and with the scarlet. But he shall let the living bird go out of the city into the open field. So he shall make atonement for the house, and it shall be clean. This is the law for any plague of leprosy, and for a scall, and for the leprosy of a garment, and of a house, and for a rising, and for a scab, and for a bright spot, to teach when it is unclean, and when it is clean. This is the law of leprosy. Leviticus chapter 15. The Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and tell them, when any man has a discharge from his body, because of his discharge he is unclean. This shall be his uncleanness in his discharge. Whether his body runs with his discharge, or his body has stopped from his discharge, it is his uncleanness. Every bed whereon he who has the discharge lies shall be unclean, and everything he sits on shall be unclean. Whoever touches his bed shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. He who sits on anything whereon he who has the discharge sat shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. He who touches the body of him who has the discharge shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. If he who has the discharge spits on him who is clean, then he shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. Whatever saddle he who has the discharge rides on shall be unclean. Whoever touches anything that was under him shall be unclean until the evening. He who carries those things shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. Whoever the one who has the discharge touches, and has not rinsed his hands in water, he shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. The earthen vessel which he who has the discharge touches shall be broken, and every vessel of wood shall be rinsed in water. When he who has a discharge is cleansed of his discharge, then he shall count for himself 7 days for his cleansing, and wash his clothes. On the 7th day he shall bathe himself in water, and he shall be clean at evening. On the 8th day he shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and come before the Lord to the door of the tent of meeting, and give them to the priest. The priest shall offer them, the one for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering. The priest shall make atonement for him before the Lord for his discharge. If any man has an emission of semen, then he shall bathe all his flesh in water, and be unclean until the evening. Every garment and every skin whereon the semen is shall be washed with water, and be unclean until the evening. If a man lies with a woman, and there is an emission of semen, they shall both bathe themselves in water, and be unclean until the evening. If a woman has a discharge, and her discharge in her flesh is blood, she shall be in her impurity 7 days. Whoever touches her shall be unclean until the evening. Everything that she lies on in her impurity shall be unclean. Everything also that she sits on shall be unclean. Whoever touches her bed shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. Whoever touches anything that she sat on shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. If it is on the bed, or on anything whereon she sits, when he touches it, he shall be unclean until the evening. If any man lies with her, and her impurity is on him, he shall be unclean 7 days. Every bed whereon he lies shall be unclean. If a woman has a discharge of her blood many days, not at the time of her impurity, or if it runs beyond the time of her impurity, all the days of the discharge of her uncleanness shall be as the days of her impurity. She is unclean. Every bed whereon she lies, all the days of her discharge shall be to her as the bed of her impurity. Everything whereon she sits shall be unclean, as the uncleanness of her impurity. Whoever touches those things shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. But if she is cleansed of her discharge, then she shall count for herself 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. On the 8th day she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and bring them to the priest, to the door of the tent of meeting. The priest shall offer the one for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her before the Lord for the uncleanness of her discharge. Thus you shall separate the children of Israel from their uncleanness, so that they don't die in their uncleanness, when they defile my tabernacle that is among them. This is the law of him who has a discharge, and of him who has an emission of semen, so that he is unclean by it, and of her who is sick with her menstrual period, and of him who has a discharge, of the man and of the woman, and of him who lies with her who is unclean.